Hi, Year 12. I just thought I'd put together this PowerPoint for you just to go through some strategies for the HSC examination as well as the upcoming trial exam. The PowerPoint will go through some tips and strategies for you to take note of, as well as looking at some directive verbs and throughout looking at what some Band 6 responses, exemplar responses actually look like and what the expectation is of you for the trial as well as the HSC. These are your 4 topics that you have studied and we continue to study. So we've had operations, followed by marketing, finance, and then human resources. These 4 topics are going to be tested throughout the exam in the multiple choice, short answer, and also in the business report and the extended response. Throughout the syllabus, you have these student learn-tos, and you've got them for each topic. The reason they're so important is because this is where the examiners actually get your extended response questions from, and you should be able to answer these throughout your study notes. So when we look at operations, it's asking you to examine contemporary business issues to discuss the balance between cost and quality in operation strategies, examine the impact of globalization on operation strategies, and these could well be an actual extended response question. Identify the breadth of government policies that affect operations management. Explain why corporate social responsibility is a key concern in operations management. We then want you to be able to investigate aspects of business using hypothetical situations or actual business case studies. So it's important for you to be able to describe the features of operations management for business in a tertiary industry. Assess the relationship between operations and the other key business functions in 2 actual businesses. Explain how operation strategies can help a business sustain its competitive advantage and recommend possible operation strategies for 1 hypothetical business. Now, when we're looking at our current circumstance, you don't just have to use 1 case study. You can be looking at the McDonald's case study or any other case study that you've studied. You can look at snippets of Google, you can look at snippets of other businesses, and you can also have a look at, I guess, intertwine the whole COVID issues that we're facing, especially when we're looking at examine the impact of globalization on operation strategy. So we know now that there's a lot of businesses that are suffering because of the fact that they can't get their products here. They can't get their products onto the shelves because we're making it overseas, because we know that's where it's actually going to be cheaper. So economies of scale may not be able to be taken advantage of. So now we look at the marketing learn-tos, and here we want to examine and explain why goods and all services are central to both marketing and operations. Examine why ethical behaviour and government regulation are important in marketing. Assess why a mix of promotional strategies is important in the marketing of goods and services. And again, this is where they can get your extended response questions from. So this is something that we will look deeper in class. In terms of hypothetical situations and actual business case studies, we want you to evaluate the marketing strategies for a good or service, and you can do that very easily through the McDonald's case study. And we know that McDonald's does marketing very, very well. Analyze a marketing plan for a business. Once again, you can use McDonald's. And explain how globalization has affected marketing management. So here, I guess we can look at a standardized marketing approach, a customized marketing approach, and the like. Now, I won't go too much into the next 2 learn-tos, but just generally, I guess when we're looking at finance, we're always looking at the short-term and long-term financial objectives and the conflict that exists with those. So it's important for you to go through your financial objectives and understand which ones are the short-term, which ones are the long-term, and how they affect one another. We need to analyse, again, here's the government and the role the government plays on these financial objectives, the limitations of financial reporting, and then comparing the risk of domestic and global financial transactions. And that's sort of that end part of that syllabus. The actual things that you have to do, you have to be able to calculate key financial ratios, and this is something that a lot of you struggle with, and you need to probably focus a little bit more on that. Assess business performance using comparative ratio analysis, and sometimes that is given to you, and then at least you can compare what's happening from one year to the next. Recommend strategies to improve financial performance, and then examine ethical financial reporting practices. So some of these job points here are extremely specific to the syllabus, and if you don't know your syllabus well, you're not going to be able to answer these in their entirety. Now, with your human resources, we have here once again discuss the influence that government plays on the process of determining employment contracts. And these employment contracts and the legal framework was done very poorly in the HSC last year, and that's something that I would like you to focus on and do some more practice questions on, and then we can sort of go through those responses. Again, corporate social responsibility comes up and why that's important within the human resource function. Analyze the causes of two workplace disputes and the strategies used to resolve them. So that's something we'll definitely look at in terms of what are those disputes, what were the factors, and then what were the remedies at the end of it and how was that solved. Examine the advantages of a diverse, culturally competent workforce for a global business. And then the other aspects that I guess we need to look at is looking at the process of negotiating collective agreements and with the negotiation of individual contracts and what the difference is there and the advantages and disadvantages of those. Looking at the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing, evaluate the effectiveness of HR management for one business and recommend appropriate alternative strategies. And the first point that I just missed out on was looking at the interdependence between HR and other key business functions. That's something that you definitely have to look at throughout your notes, because that's something that's definitely going to come up. Just a quick tip when you are writing in the HSC is make sure that you're using a black pen or a dark blue pen, because these papers are all scanned, and sometimes if it's a lighter colour it just won't come up as easy. And I use this word attractive. You need to make your answers attractive and easy to read, and in the marker's face, you know, they've been looking at a screen for 4 hours, so you need to be kind to them, because you don't know when they're actually going to read your paper. Is it going to be at the beginning of their 4 hours or at the end of their 4 hours? Now, in terms of fairer marking, it's definitely fair, because you've got two people that mark it, and if there's a huge discrepancy between the two marks, then the senior marker will get involved and I guess make a decision in terms of where he or she thinks the answer should be. Now, I did some reading and someone mentioned using pink highlighter. So if you're going to use a highlighter, use a pink one, because the pink comes up a lot better. But that doesn't mean that if you use another colour, you'll still see a bit of a shading when your answers are scanned. Now, each topic is worth 25% of the course. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that there's going to be a balance across all of the questions. You need to know your topics very well. You need to know your syllabus very well. Understand how to apply case study information to every single aspect of the content. And the last one, what you know best may not be assessed. So understand your areas of weakness and strengthen these. So you can't just bank on knowing the stuff that you're comfortable with. You have to sort of delve into the stuff that you're not very comfortable with and where you see your weakness. And the only way I guess you're going to assess that weakness is by answering as many questions as possible and then realizing that I don't actually know what I'm doing here. Now, in regards to case studies and the role that they play, it's important for you to be able to link each aspect of the syllabus to a case study. Now, the case study that we have for you is the McDonald's case study that all of you have a copy of, and that is an updated version of that, as well as Domino's from your textbook. So the Domino's one is great, it's up to date, and I'm sure that you can even add to that. Now, you can have a range of case studies, you can make up a case study, but you have to be careful when you're making up a case study that you're not wasting too much time coming up with that. So you don't want to sit in an exam and think, oh, what could I write here? What could this business do? It'll be worthwhile for you to be using the case studies that we've given you, as well as the other ones that you speak about in class or you've read an article on. So it's fine for you to talk about 5 case studies in a extended response, if that's going to best illustrate your answer. Now, if you aren't aware of the structure of the HSC, I've just put here on the right-hand side what the structure of the HSC is going to be. This is also how your trial examination is going to be set out as well. So you'll have the 20 multiple choice. These will come from every topic, 4 to 6 questions of up to 10 marks each. So you may get stimulus or you may not. They may integrate topics together and they may require you to talk about some case studies. With section 3 and 4 of the exam, section 3 is your business report, and here they're going to integrate 2 topics together. So you'll have the scenario, and then you'll have a couple of dot points at the bottom, which is what they actually would like you to answer. The last section is where you have to write an essay. Now you're going to get a choice of 2 questions here, and those 2 topics are going to be different from the topics in section 3. So essentially in section 3 and 4, you're going to be tested on all 4 topics, but differently. So with section 4, you may not like one of the questions, which is fine, and then you'll just answer the other one. With this one, this is where you must include your case studies throughout. Timing for your exam, your trial, as well as your HSC is very important. So these are suggested timings. Now you might find that you finish the multiple choice in 20 minutes, and that leaves you 15 minutes to add on somewhere else. Similarly, with the short answer, you might finish in less than an hour and 15, but that might allow you to add on that 5 minutes of planning for the business report and the extended responses. Now, when we're looking at our 5 initial considerations for our exam, you have to look at mark allocation. Note the relationship between mark and time. You don't want to be spending large amounts of time on a 1 or a 2 mark question. You need to be looking at the line space. How much do you actually write? Use the allocated lines and don't waste time writing more. Keep your answers concise, to the point, and tell the marker what you want to say. You don't want to spend three lines until you actually start answering that question. You need to be looking at the directive verb, and that's something we're going to look at in a minute. So you've got your low order verbs, which is your list, name, identify, outline, define, recall, your 1 and 2 markers. You've got your medium order, which is describe, explain, detail, and then your high order, which is your propose, justify, assess, evaluate, analyze. And that's where you're going to get your 6 markers, you're going to get your 20 markers. So this is where you're going to be expected to write a lot more. Make sure that you always use the stimulus. So every time there is a stimulus above a question, it's there for a purpose. It's there for you to refer back to it. And the syllabus connections, it frames every answer. You have to be linking the right syllabus dot points with what you're saying. Now, over the next couple of slides, I'm going to go through some of the directive verbs that we see predominantly in business studies exams, and some are a lot more complicated than others. Now, when we look at our first one, which is account, you're stating reasons for and you're reporting on it. The example here is JCar's net profit declined from 40% in 2009, and the reason for this includes a large fall in sales revenue and an increase in admin expenses. So you're telling me what happened, and then you're telling me what is the reason for that. Why did that actually happen? Now, analyze is a high order skill or a high order directive verb. And here we're looking at identify the components and the relationship between them, draw out and relate implications. So we need to know what's happened and what was the outcome of that. So examples here is staff turnover at Madison Designs has increased from 6 to 10%, which indicates the staff have become less satisfied with their workplace. So you're making a judgment there. You're making a judgment to say, well, if the staff turnover's increased, then obviously they're not happy. The same thing with the next one. KFC's rate of industrial disputes has fallen by 10%. This could mean that KFC workers are now more satisfied with their working conditions. And it's fine for you to make that judgment at the end, because it's obvious that something good's happening or something bad's happening, hence why the numbers go up or down. Now, the last one, Channel 9 has recently adopted a flatter management structure. The implication of this may include clearer communication channels between senior management and lower level employees. So we know that because there's a flatter management structure, that's probably why or what the reason for that is. So when you're looking at assess here, you're making a judgment of value, quality, outcomes, results, or size. And some examples here is Aussie manufacturing net profit of 53% is much better than the industry average of 25%. And then you can sort of assess the reasons as to why that's happening. So with compare, you need to be looking at how things are either similar or different and what those similarities and differences are. And that might just be if they're in the same industry or their industry averages are higher, or, you know, in this case, Hungry Jack's has a very high debt level, whereas Pizza Hut has a much smaller level of debt. So here you're looking at two different things. So there's got to be some kind of comparison there. So contrasting is a little similar to compare, but in this instance, we're looking at how things are different or opposite. Again, distinguish is very similar to compare. You're noting the differences between two or more things. And a lot of these verbs are very similar. So if you can just sort of group them together where you can say, yep, right, I get distinguish, compare, contrast, then I know that they're pretty much asking me for the same things. In regards to this directive verb, describe comes up a lot in your short answer responses. And what we're looking at here is we want to provide characteristics and features. So we want to tell the marker a little bit of what we're looking at and what we're trying to describe to them, so they're aware of what does it actually look like, what does the situation look like. Again, discuss is one that we're going to find and see a lot in our short answer responses. Now, here, this is where a lot of you make the mistake of not providing points for and against. You need to be looking at the advantages and the disadvantages of whatever the question is asking you. Don't just look at a one side, look at both sides. Now, in regards to evaluate, we're looking here at making a judgment based on criteria. Now, criteria can be very different, but you've got to base it on something. So are you going to base it on profitability, debt, growth, market share? Examples here, JB Hi-Fi strategy in 2009 has been highly successful because they have increased their net profit by 30% compared to 2008. So you're actually comparing something, whether that's the net profit, whether it is market share. So you have to base a judgment on something. You can't just say JB Hi-Fi strategy has led to an increase in the business. Well, you're not telling me what part of the business. Explain is a directive verb that will also come up very often. Now here we're looking at relating cause and effect. So what is the reason as to what happened, and then what's going to be the effect on the actual business? And you're providing me the why and or the how in terms of the explain directive verb. Now justify or recommend is a higher order verb, and here I want you to actually make a statement. I want you to support an argument or a conclusion and tell me why you do that. Give me reasons as to why you're justifying this maybe element of the business, and then recommend a strategy that they could actually undertake. So here what you're looking at, maybe in a business report, you're looking at recommending a strategy for this business to undertake. So you're looking at a couple of options and then you're going to hone in on one of them. We're almost there with our directive verbs. Now we've outlined, again, that's a lower order directive verb. So here you'll be maybe a couple of marks, and we're sketching things in general terms. So we're not going into too much detail. We're not offering any justification. We're not analyzing anything. And then we're just going to look at the main features of the question. So the main features of Telstra's advertising strategy are television commercials and telemarketing. So you need to be careful that when you're actually answering an outline question, you're still putting it in a nice, tidy sentence, but you're just getting straight to the point. So now we're going to go through some multiple choice questions and just looking at the style of multiple choice questions that can be asked of you. So in this instance, it's an interdependence question. So it's asking you to look at 2 key business functions and then determine which key business functions we're looking at based on the question there. So the answer for this one would be operations and marketing. So a business plans to increase its stocks to be ready for the grand opening of 5 new stores. This shows the interdependence between which 2 business functions. Now, the increasing stock is part of operations because you're making that stock, and the 5 new stores is related to marketing and the 4 Ps. So process of elimination, you can go through that. Now you can have finance questions without numbers, and the next couple that we're going to look at actually have numbers, but in this case, which of the following would immediately improve the working capital of a business? Now it's important for you to read all 4 of your options before you actually answer the question, because sometimes you're quick to judge if it's an A or B, and then you're not actually looking at what is the C and D response. In this case, we were looking at working capital, which is our day-to-day money that we've got to spend. And using a sale and leaseback strategy would actually inject a lot of money back into the business. With this question here, it's important when you're going through the answers. Now, before you even read the answer here, you might want to go through before you read the question, you might want to go through the answers here and just sort of define them in your mind very quickly before you actually read the question, because that will then make your answer, one that you can stand by and you're more confident with that that's the right response.
Now, in order to maximize your marks in all your written sections, you really need to be mindful of the approach you take. Now, I can't stress enough about answering the question. Answer the question that the marker is asking you, not the question you want. Now, by you going in with a pre-prepared response, you're not answering the question that the marker is actually, or the examiner has asked of you. Look at the directive terms. I should be able to read your topic sentence in the introduction and say, yep, I know exactly what the question is that this person is answering. Now, marks will not be deducted for irrelevant or wrong material. However, it forms a really poor impression. So I could be looking at a couple of paragraphs and say, well, this paragraph actually doesn't count. They've just wasted all their time talking about something that may not be a limitation of financial reports, or maybe something that they've just put in to show me that they know so much about a particular topic. The first impression is going to count. The first impression is going to make a massive difference, because when that marker's reading your introduction, it should be, wow, this kid knows their stuff, and I'm expecting a really, really good response here. I want you to go for quality, be concise, and answer using appropriate business language. A quantity of quality is best, not just a quantity for the sake of writing. As much as details as possible, leave out the irrelevant stuff. I want you to stick to the time limits. Now, if you find that for your business report, you've hit 40 minutes, you have to stop. You have to stop and you have to go to your extended response. You don't want to only leave yourself 20 minutes for your extended response, because if you're sort of almost there with your business report, you've got a couple of paragraphs, yes, you're going to lose a few marks, but you stand to lose a lot more in the extended response question. Over the next few slides, I've put in some sample answers on what basically got full marks. And this question is saying, explain why managers may be resistant to change. Now let's read sample 2 there. Managers can be resistant to change due to specific issues, financially or psychologically. Change in the business environment can be costly due to purchasing new equipment, facility layout, and other factors like redundancy packages, each impeding on businesses' revenue and financial stability. In addition, psychological inertia has a negative effect on employees, fostering displacement or job change equals unease and a decrease in production. Thus, managers become resistant to change. Now, just be mindful of, using, I guess, these, abbreviations here, a decrease equals, but I guess if you're running out of some room, but just write it. I'd rather you just write it out and don't expect the market to just decode what you're trying to say. Now, in this sample, the first thing you saw, they've answered the question in those first couple of words. And that's really important for that well-rounded response. This question is a 6-marker, and here it's asking you to analyse the use of sequencing and scheduling to improve business operations. Now, when you're reading this response, I would want you to be able to define sequencing and scheduling. I'd like you to be able to tell me the tools that we could use for sequencing and scheduling and the role that they could play to improve business operations. And then you've got that well-rounded response there. Now, this is the example of a short answer question where you do have some stimulus. Now, you've got a stimulus there that's talking about Bill and Jane and the cafe that they're operating. And then you've got your 3 questions there. So you've got outline 2 strengths of the cafe, outline 2 opportunities for the cafe, and then for 6 marks, discuss 1 marketing strategy that Bill and Jane could use to respond to the threat posed by the opening of the multinational franchise in the area. And over the page, we'll start looking at some of the samples and just what the expectation is for 2 marks. So what you can see with these 2 samples, sample 1 is looking at just some dot points and they're explaining them, and sample 2 is looking at a sort of more of a paragraph style question. Now, what you have to also remember is you would want your writing to be quite neat. So that way, again, it's easy for the marker to read. Here is another question with stimulus. So here you've got a 2-marker, a 4-marker, and a 6-marker. So you're outlining, you're explaining, and then you're assessing. Now, these sample answers actually have a little comment under them in terms of what the markers actually thought about the question. Now, it makes a general statement about the role of operations as improving efficiency and quality. So you're actually now explaining why they're more efficient, why their quality is improving. So you're giving a little bit more in your response. So here we have a human resource question. Describe 1 monetary reward that could be offered during the recruitment process. 2, describe 1 non-monetary reward that could be offered during the recruitment process. B, outline an issue that could arise during the acquisition process. So again, we want to know what the acquisition dot point has under that in order for us to be able to answer that. Recommend 2 indicators that could be used by the business to measure the effectiveness of human resource management. So that's your 6 markers. So 3 marks would go to 1 indicator, 3 marks would go to the other. And we'll have a look at some of the answers for that 6 marker. Now, for that 6-mark question where we're looking at the effectiveness measures within HR, the answer here is this business could use the absenteeism and staff turnover rates to measure the effects of the business expansion and the effectiveness of human resource management. So they're the effectiveness criteria that we're looking at there. So absenteeism is 1, staff turnover rate is 1, and then they go into looking at the first one. So absenteeism rates of employees refers to the amount of staff not present per day Absenteeism could be used to indicate employee dissatisfaction or unhappiness, which could be a direct result or an uncertainty or conflict after a business expansion. So the little stimulus there said what could happen when a business expands. The second one, staff turnover rates, refers to the number of staff who have quit, been made redundant, or fired over certain time periods. These rates would indicate that to the business and human resource management that it is not working efficiently and solving disputes or satisfying the employees or the company. So it's not asking you to answer anything out of this world, but it's just breaking that question down. Now, again, you need to know your syllabus. Back to that syllabus. So here we have a question, finance with numbers, and you're going to get some of those. It hasn't really been asked over the last couple of years, but for your finance assessment that you did, you had finance questions with numbers as well as without. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of an insight into how to answer these questions. So you'll get your financial statement here. And then what you need to be really careful of is this bit here, the other information. The other information are going to give you some tips. They might give you a formula. They might give you the net profit. Now, the net profit, you know that we don't get off a balance sheet. We get off a income statement. So they're giving you the information that you need. So there's two questions. Explain one possible limitation of this financial report, and then discuss the gearing of Andrew's discount tyres, and that's your 5 marker. Now with this question, you have a table here that's got some information about the effectiveness criteria for human resources. A, to what extent is human resource management effective in this business? Support your answer with examples from the data. So in this case, you're actually going to compare, you're going to look at what's happening in 2014, what's happening in 2015, which ones are getting better and which ones are getting worse. And also, are there any links in terms of, the training expenditure dropped substantially from 2014 to 2015. So does that mean that maybe the accidents increased? We see that absenteeism actually went up as well. So maybe they're not happy. I mean, staff turnover did also go down. So we can sort of look at what's happening there. Again, the second question is saying, using the data, analyse the interdependence between HR management and profitability management in this business. Okay, now let's get into the business report. The business report, I always get kids saying, I don't know how to write a business report. Don't beat yourself up over this. Don't overthink things. A business report is just one that's got some subheadings, and it just breaks down your answer. Now, you've got 35 minutes for this section. They want you to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding relevant to the question. They want you to apply the hypothetical business situation, which is that big lot of stimulus, communicate using relevant business terminology and concepts, and present a sustained, logical, and cohesive response in the form of a business report. So these are all the things that you can use in a business report. So you're going to have your executive summary, which is your introduction. Your structure, you're going to have headings, use of paragraphs, use of diagrams. So let's say, for example, you are asked to write a SWOT analysis, which you may. You can draw that up in a table like. If you want to draw the human resource cycle, because you're talking about acquisition and development, you can do so. Use of tables, you can use underlining, you can use bullet points, and then you want to offer some recommendations at the end. Now, you just need to be careful though when you're using bullet points that you're not just writing a couple of words. You're still giving us an explanation and you're looking at that answer as a whole. Now, the syllabus doesn't specify an accepted format for a business report. So the business report is open to interpretation. You're not going to be penalised for not having the perfect business report. You're not going to be penalised because you didn't put a heading where you should have put a heading. But as long as it sort of looks like a report structure, you are going to be fine. Regardless of your style, you need to stick to concise sentences and keep the paragraphs relatively short. Leave a line between each paragraph, especially if your writing is untidy or difficult to read. And again, we're going back to that, how attractive does your answer look? You want to look at something attractive. When something is messy or unattractive, you sort of turn away. You don't really want to be looking at that. So let's make your answer easy to read for the marker. Now, in terms of your executive summary, your executive summary is an introduction that outlines the information and issues that are going to be included in your report. So the same way that you would write an introduction in an essay, you're basically just telling the marker, this is what these are the problems I'm going to address within the business. For exam purposes, you must keep this relatively brief. Focus on the main sections you have identified in the question and that you will focus on in your response. Simply rewriting the question won't really add much to your mark, okay? You need to give something more. So this is what the problem is, this is how I'm going to discuss it, and these are the suggestions that I'm going to offer this particular business. The executive summary will be more effective if you include suggestions and or recommendations you intend to include in the body of your report. So let's have a look at an example of what an executive summary could include. This report addresses a range of internal and external issues related to the proposed overseas expansion of Cat's handbags. The report outlines a range of funding alternatives, provides the main features of each alternative, and suggests the most appropriate funding strategy. It then proposed a relevant and appropriate process for developing a marketing plan for the global launch. Finally, it outlines a range of financial management options and recommends those strategies that are most likely to ensure the successful financial management of Cat's handbags in the global market. So you're now sort of getting that well-rounded executive summary. You're not just rewording what the question's asking. Headings at the beginning of each section so that the marker knows exactly what part of the report you're talking about. Underline or highlight the heading. For example, you could have expansion options for Cat's handbags, use subheadings where appropriate, underline or highlight key terms, use relevant and appropriate business terms and concepts. It's just sort of going over that same thing. Now, in regards to setting out the report, you can list things. You can use dot points, numbers, or letters. For example, an industrial dispute is an argument or conflict between management and employees. The main causes of industrial disputes are wages, working conditions, and management policies. After that, you can start, or underneath each one of those, you can start explaining your dot point into more detail and then move on. Each dot point in the list may contain more detail within it, or you can do it afterwards. For example, you may choose to define or explain each term, and if you do this, underline the term to make it stand out from the explanation. For example, wages, the remuneration paid to employees in the form of wages, salaries, or penalty rates. And this is where your definitions are very important. That's where you're showing the marker that you have that understanding of the concepts. Diagrams, tables, or charts. Make sure that you do this where appropriate. You don't just draw things for the sake of it, because one, you're wasting time, and the marker's just going to say, well, this is pretty unnecessary. Don't just draw something without explaining it. So you might have an introductory sentence into what you're talking about. So if it's the marketing process is extremely important for a business, and they must go through various steps along the way. The steps can be shown in the diagram below. So you're labeling and you're clearly talking about this diagram. For example, because of the dynamic nature of the business environment, the marketing process must be a continuous cycle. This should ensure it remains flexible and responsive to the changing nature of the market. Such a marketing plan process can be seen in the following diagram. So there's that little bit of introduction. You're giving it some context. You're not just throwing things in because you've got a bit of time and you just want to draw. I want you to use appropriate abbreviations. So make sure that you are, if you're using SWOT analysis, that's fine, but don't go and use abbreviations that are unique to you. We need to know what you're talking about because that's just going to lose the whole flow of when your teacher's reading. Now, that scenario that you have at the beginning of every business report is quite important. Now, the scenario there is telling me a lot about the business. It's telling me what the type of the business is, if it's a large business, a small business, what the product is that they're providing, what industry they're part of, is it a consumer or a business market, who are their competitors, and that way you can start thinking about who the competitors might be. It might tell you about the business performance, so where they were, how they are now, where they want to be, what problems exist, whether that's internal or external, the strengths and opportunities, the strengths the business has and the opportunities that they could potentially have outside in the external environment, and then the current management strategies and future plans. Remember, this information is there to help you answer the question. It's implied, so it's not going to really give you the answer, but you can take this information and then you can run with it to offer those suggestions. You're expected to interpret the information using your accumulated knowledge and understanding. So again, there is no right or wrong, but they obviously want you to be able to offer some suggestions to this business. I've given you the example from the 2014 HSC question, and you've got your business report here on EMU uniforms, and at the bottom there you've been hired as a consultant to write a report to the management of this business. So they're asking you to recommend a source of finance for the factory expansion, discuss outsourcing overseas compared with the factory expansion. And when you're looking at that, you obviously need to be looking at the advantages and the disadvantages of overseas outsourcing for this business and what it actually means for EMU uniform manufacturers. And the last one, explain the global factors that need to be considered if they decide to use outsourcing as an operations strategy. So that's going to be your global factors at the end of that syllabus. Now, the next couple of slides, I've just put a sample response of what someone wrote in the HSC and the mark they received. So take some time to go through that, and then in class we can deconstruct those answers. So what we have here just quickly is a very quick plan. A plan's really important. So one, it offers you direction, but it also shows the marker where you're going, oh, they've got a plan there. So let's say by some chance you didn't finish your answer, they can actually go back to that plan and say, oh, they're actually going to talk about research and development, economies of scale, CSR. So they knew where they were heading. Now you've got your executive summary, which is quite brief, and then you've got your first subheading, which is long-term sources of finance. And then they go into looking at why it's important to choose the right type of finance and how it's going to always benefit EMU uniforms. And you can see here how they're mentioning that company regularly. So here's your next subheading where you've got advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing. You could then break that down. You could just have outsourcing, let's say, as your main heading, and then the first subheading to be advantages of outsourcing, go over those, and then disadvantages. So it's up to you how you set that out. You're not going to lose marks, as you can see here, if you have not used as many subheadings as you think you need to use. I just want to have a look at this comment that the markers wrote. Legitimate and logical reasons in favour of leasing are provided. There is a good discussion of the points and issues related to outsourcing. global factors are linked in detail to EMU and its operations. Some other factors are also listed, extensive knowledge demonstrated through the response. So they've actually linked it back to EMU quite well, but it's also been legitimate and logical. So you haven't just given these suggestions that are not doable. Your suggestions always have to be quite doable and quite precise. Now, the last section of this presentation is looking at extended responses. So this is the case study question. This is the one that you have a choice of. So both questions are equal in difficulty. One is not more difficult than the other, but they do focus on two different topics. So you might find one topic more difficult than the other, and then that your choice is made quite easy. They test the same basic outcomes. Now, you have to include a case study here. If we look at the rubric, it specifies there, apply relevant business case study or studies and contemporary business issues. Now, I think COVID's going to be a really big thing in the HSC. I think it's something that you can revert back to when you're talking about the contemporary business environment at the moment. Now, in 2014, question 27 was assess the importance of using a mix of promotional strategies in the marketing of goods and services. That's a pretty good question. I think that most of you would be able to answer this question. So you're looking at promotional strategies and what kind of promotional strategies exist, and the dot point is the promotional mix. And then you're linking that back to marketing, and then you're actually looking at what businesses you're using. So if you use McDonald's as an example, you can look at their strategies and who they actually target in their, I guess in their message. So this introduction here, when marketing goods and services, it is essential that a business use a mix of promotional strategies. Use of a singular strategy limit the number of people towards which the product is marketed, which can decrease sales and overall business profitability. So they're telling us that if you use one side or one promotional strategy, you're going to limit yourself. So they're giving some kind of recommendation there already. However, if business use a mix of different promotional strategies, the scope of consumers learning about the business, good or service is widened, increasing potential sales, market share, and overall profitability. Key promotional strategies include the elements of the promotion mix. So you've got advertising, personal selling, sales promotion, and publicity and public relations, as well as communication strategies such as opinion leaders and word of mouth. Qantas is an Australian business through which one can see the importance of using a mix of promotional strategies. So they've really told you a lot in that paragraph in terms of what they're going to talk about. So if I don't read this essay, I will know that they're going to look at all of those promotional strategies, but they're also going to find some kind of link there that's going to link back to that question, but also link back to how Qantas, in this case, is using these promotional strategies and how successful they've been. Now, this essay is quite a long one. It went over for a couple of pages. Now, the comment there that the marker gave clearly makes evident the relationship between a mix of promotional strategies and marketing of goods and services, and includes some well-worded judgments of the importance of using a mix of promotional strategies to tie together the many strategies it covers. It applies a relevant case study about Qantas throughout, using great detail, including covering a contemporary issue of the grounding of the fleet in 2011. The response is sustained, logical, and cohesive. Now, if you spoke about 4 different businesses in this essay, again, not a bad way to go, because you might find that you can explain part of the promotional strategy for one business better than you could for another business. So again, it's your choice as to what you do. Now, I hope that this presentation is quite easy for you to understand, but I also just want you to get an overall understanding of what the expectations are. And I've put some samples there for you to read, just to sort of see what the I guess what the vibe is out there and what the expectations are. So we'll go through more of this in class, but this is just a very quick overview, I guess, of the expectations that we have of you. So I hope you enjoy and see you in class.